So I don't know what it is, but one of the things that I've always been kind of interested in is a person's last word. Now, I know this kind of sounds a little bit morbid, but the idea of what someone says right before they pass away is really intriguing to me, especially if they know that they are about to go. What would you say if you knew this was going to be your last words? I don't know when this started for me. I think maybe it began back when I was in high school. I was taking this class in high school. It was called Science Fiction Lit. And we read some really cool short stories, Ray Bradbury, that kind of story. And it was great. I loved it. But the other thing we did was we watched the teacher's favorite movie. Now, I'm not really sure how this relates to science fiction, but his favorite movie was Citizen Kane. Now, if you've never seen Citizen Kane, it's an old black and white movie, and the way it starts is it zooms up on this house and it goes into the bedroom, and there laying on the bed is Charles Foster Kane. And as he gets ready to say his last word, he's holding the snow globe, and then he says, "Rosebud," and he drops the snow globe. Well, the whole movie then is based on this reporter who's looking back at his life, trying to write about Mr. Kane's life, and trying to figure out what this word rosebud could possibly mean. Now, if you haven't seen the movie yet or don't know what rosebud is, I'm not going to ruin it for you. You can Google it if you want, or you can watch the movie, whatever. But it was really interesting because this word, in a very interesting way, summed up at least what he was thinking about at the end of his life as a very wealthy and rich man. So what got me to thinking about this idea of last words was, here we are in the middle of Lent, and you can see that that's why we have our sanctuary adorned in black. It kind of reminds us that during this time, we're focused on our humanity. We're focused on this journey of Jesus to the cross, as well as perhaps our journey and our inner looking at ourselves to try to figure out, what is it about God? How does God connect with who we are at our most raw level? So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, what were Jesus's last words? And of course, we have the last words that Jesus spoke on the cross. But more than that, I wanted to look back and see what was the last conversation, the real last conversation Jesus had with his disciples before he went to the cross. Perhaps the best place to find that is in the Gospel of John. And the reason I say that is because the Gospel of John has a conversation that Jesus has with his disciples during the time of the Last Supper. Now, John doesn't include the actual Last Supper. He doesn't include that part. But at the beginning of this conversation, Jesus does something extremely shocking to his disciples. He takes the basin and he pours water into the basin, and then he begins to walk around and he washes the disciples' feet, and he dries them with his cloak that he's tied around his waist. Now, of course, Peter doesn't want any part of this, and he protests because, that's kind of how Peter is. He protests about what Jesus is doing, making sure that Jesus understands what he's doing, and he says, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You're Lord, you're Master, you're my teacher. You can't do something like this. This is for servants." And Jesus says, "If you don't let me wash your feet, then you will have no part of me." Of course, then Peter, being Peter, says, "Well, then give me a whole bath. Wash my whole body." Basically, at the end of this, Jesus wants to tell them something very important, and he's used the basin of water, and he's used this act of washing his disciples' feet as one of the last things he needs to tell them. And so picking up from John chapter 13, verse 12, this is what happens after he's washed his disciples' feet. After Jesus had washed their feet, he put on his robe and had returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, that is what I am. So, if I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their masters, nor are masters greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Jesus is trying to, as a part of one of his last words to his disciples, his last conversation, explain to them the difference between what it means to be a servant leader versus a leader who lords his power over another. And Jesus is trying to help them understand that in order to truly follow him, humility needs to be the thing that guides all that they do. Now, I was reading a definition of this from a Presbyterian pastor by the name of Frederick Buechner, and he talked about how humility is not this kind of gentlemanly self-deprivation. He said that's not what humility is. It's like saying, well, I'm not really that much of a bridge player when you know deep down you are. He said that's not true humility. That's just kind of comedy, a lowbrow comedy. You know it's not true, so why would you say it? Buechner talked about how true humility doesn't have to do with putting yourself down. It's recognizing who you are and then being willing to meet others with right where they are. And not feeling yourself so high and above that person that you can't also care for them in a way that puts them at that same or equal level. A servant is not greater than a master. We are not greater than one another. We might have better skills than another person, but we are not greater than another. Jesus said that, and he modeled that in the way, with humility, he cared for his disciples, and he charged them and us with living that same way as we care for one another.